A very warm welcome to Anna Leibel to Fire and Forte. Welcome, Anna.
Thanks, Hannah. It's fantastic to be here.
It's so great to see someone looking so corporate while I'm sat in my living room. I almost missed the office already. So perfect inspirational look for our conversation, I think.
I've got my yoga pants on. I'm liking it.
That's the secret. That is the secret. Well, Anna, I'm delighted that you're joining us. I mean, there's so many different ways that I could introduce you, but I think one of the main things that one of the headlines that I chose to go with was the fact that we need more women in tech. And yet we don't see as many women in tech, in my experience, to really understand what it takes to be in tech. And not only have you worked in tech for, I think, all of your life, you've also been a chief information officer for a number of huge businesses and were voted in the top 50 CIOs in a recent study in Australia. I think that was very recent. So the fact that you were nominated for this project and accepted is, first of all, nominated, not surprised. When you accepted and we could find that time in the diary, I was completely, I was really excited. So there was no way I was missing this 8 a.m. start.
Thanks. And I've got my coffee and I've got a tea, so I'm primed.
I know, I'm a bit jealous there. I think I've just got water. So I'm just going to read the list. So because you've actually worked at businesses including Telstra, PwC and UniSuper. And UniSuper, that's a fund worth $100 billion. And that's Australian dollars. So the immense security that was required around that, and goodness knows what else to make sure that that was secure and making sure everything was operating sufficiently, to me sounds incredibly pressurized and no room for error. And now, really excitingly, you've set up your own cybersecurity board, and you've written a book, and you've got a podcast. So well done for being right on trend. Is it right on trend? You're just what the world needs, you know, and I think that's a big thing about Fire and Forte. Women that are in their 40s who've got this incredible experience, talent and courage to go after something. For any listeners that are not in Australia, Australia has had some huge hackings recently. I'm sure there's not many places in the world that hasn't had those, but in the media we've had the likes of Optus had a huge cyber attack. So the fact that you're in that industry is amazing, and the fact that you've achieved everything that you've achieved already is incredible. So Anna, thank you so much for this time, because you've obviously got some hackings to probably go and fix after this conversation. So yeah, over to you really. How did it start? How did all of that start?
So I actually taught myself how to code when I was 8. So I like to say that IT chose me as a career rather than the other way around. And I've always found IT really easy to learn and easy to apply. And I think what's made me different through my career is that I'm not motivated by tech. I've always focused on the business value it can deliver, so enabling business outcomes, versus actually building tech just for widget's sake. And I think that's really been something that's made me different and really positioned me as a business leader rather than the techo. So that's worked really well. When I was in year 12, so finishing high school, I actually started my own business in the July. I turned 18, and with a stack of business cards and borrowed my mum's car, Toyota Camry, hottie, yep. And actually started teaching businesses, families and students how to use the computer. And I know that sounds really weird now, but back then, that's when the internet was new. So we called it the World Wide Web back then. And also basically all the Microsoft Office suite of products was new. People didn't understand what email was. Word, Excel, PowerPoint and Access was all new as well. So I actually built a business teaching people how to use those products. And then through my 20s, commenced my corporate career. So I worked through more technical roles, so service desky type roles and help desk, desktop support. I loved all of that, really helping people, I suppose, solve their computer problems and how to use, you know, the tools that I've just described. But the most instrumental role of my 20s was actually working at Seek. So for those not in Australia, Seek is an online job site or job board. And so I got a call from a recruiter asking if I wanted to go and have an interview with this company that had job ads online. And at the time I was like, what? You know, you look for a job in the paper on a Saturday and a Wednesday. You know, you don't look for those online because the internet was still so new. And I went for the job interview and I suppose fell in love with my boss, who's now one of my very, very close friends. She's absolutely amazing and a fantastic role model for me. And taking that job is probably the best decision that I've ever made. As out of my whole career, it's still my favourite and most instrumental role that I've had. And the reason it was so different was it really taught me a lot about workplace culture. So at Seek, we were basically, our job had to be done 75% of the time, and 25% of the time we're able to do whatever we wanted. And it's funny, that's back in 2001, that most people assumed back then that everyone would just bludge for the 25%. We'd do PlayStation, we'd play table tennis, those sorts of things. But after 1 or 2 weeks of people doing that, people want to be good. They want to do a good job. They want to be productive. People actually then went and sat with different departments to learn more about their part of the business, which worked really well. Another great example is September 11. So that occurred when I was working at Seek and our job ads went down significantly. So our CEO got us all together and said, we can't get through this financially the way that we are, but we don't want to lose any of you, and asked us to go to 4 days a week to get through that. And for me, that's leadership, because I've worked for a lot of people since that have made big decisions, and I'm talking probably redundancies versus just, you know, asking a vendor for a discount or negotiating a contract change, but made people redundant to meet their budget. And I think the way that Seek dealt with that was absolutely amazing. But I also met my partner there. So we met 21 years ago. We've been together 20 years now. We actually sat next to each other. We started on the same day.
Oh, very cute.
And there was actually lots of Seek romances back then because they hired for cultural fit. And so it's really interesting to get a workplace. It was only 100 people back then. There was 30 people in IT. But just the fact that my boss is still, you know, one of my closest friends, and that I'm with my colleague that I sit next to, which is a bit random, is just, I suppose in a lot of ways it's been really instrumental in my career. But the other thing, I learned how to get stuff done without any money, because Seek didn't have any money. And so that's also been something that's been quite different, working in a corporate environment. So then I moved into my 30s and spent most of my 30s working in leadership roles. So I went from quite small leadership roles with a team, you know, of about 4 up to just over 200 people, and more transformational type roles, so change roles, in mostly at Telstra. And then towards the end of my career at Telstra, I was actually asked to join the sales team. So leave IT, which for me was huge, to go over and work in a sales role, working with Telstra's enterprise and government CIOs. So really helping them understand how Telstra could help them deliver on their IT strategy. And that was huge for me, like massive change in many, many ways. But I did sales for about 2.5 years. But that led to me joining PwC, as it's not often that people have actually got the experience delivering IT, but also being able to sell. So PwC approached me for that role. That was great. And about 18 months later, I moved into my first executive role, which was with UniSuper, as you mentioned before. So I joined them. I was in the role for about 2 years, and through my ability to get stuff done, but also build relationships across the business, and I suppose the way that I lead, they did a restructure about halfway through my time at UniSuper, and I was given the customer, which was amazing. So all of member operations, which, as you touched on before, is significant in terms of getting that right. So it's not just for the member experience, it's also heavily regulated, and also picked up project delivery. So all of the strategic projects for the fund and all of the compliance projects as well. But my very dear friend, Claire Pales, we met at Telstra about 15 years ago. She'd been asking me for a few years if I'd write a book with her. So it would have been her second book, because she's already written one. And I'd been saying for years, no, too busy, no, too busy, no, too busy. But we've had the world's longest lockdown in Victoria. So I think it was late 2020, we went into another lockdown, and I actually called her and said, let's do it now. And little did I know at the time, because I wrote the book more as a bucket listy type thing, it's actually changed my life. So the book's actually been instrumental in changing, my life, because it's not just the work that I do, it's actually had a massive impact on my work, on my life outside of work. So I'm very, very grateful for Claire to, first of all, think of writing a book with me, but then to keep asking me. So we wrote the book. And as you mentioned before, back then, cyber events within Australia were still quite rare. But also it was really seen that cyber was the accountability of the IT team. Mm. And we're seeing now playing out with Medibank and with Optus, this has significant impacts on businesses and needs to be treated as an enterprise risk, not an IT risk. And so I actually made the very hard decision to leave UniSuper over the Christmas break of 2020, 2021 and returned from Christmas leave and resigned. It's one of the biggest decisions I've ever made. And to be honest with you, it's not because of the work, because to be honest with you, the work's the same everywhere. It was actually the people, the team that I worked with at UniSuper, and you and I met through one of them. Like even now, it makes me feel really emotional about leaving them because they're just so amazing. But I also think it's the people we spent COVID with, we've got a different type of relationship with them that hopefully, touch wood, we'll never, ever have to experience again. And I think we supported each other through that time when we were in lockdown. So I left UniSuper earlier last year. And I've spent the last, 18 months or so working with Claire to build a business where we educate boards and executive teams around cyber. And I also sit on 2 boards. So
representing women everywhere. There we go.
Yes.
How incredible. I mean, I'd like, what an incredible trajectory. And when you look back on it, it sounds as though, well, you can see that natural progression and how it happened. But it's probably only now when you look back that you think each of these steps led you to where you are today, because the courage to set up on your own sounds hugely courageous. But one thing that I was thinking about as you were speaking is how many different audiences you've had to work with, how many different businesses. The first time you went and found out that your client was going to be the government, what were the daunting parts of each of those roles when you found out who your stakeholders were? Were any of those daunting to you?
The customers weren't. Internally, the processes were.
Right.
It was really interesting. So I felt very, very comfortable with techos. So I'd worked with them my whole life. So going to meet with a client, I felt comfortable and confident regardless of where the conversation went.
Okay.
But moving from IT into a sales team was woo. So in IT, I knew what I was good at. And I think one of the things that I worked out over my career is for probably 10 years, I tried to be like everyone else. And then I decided to focus on what makes me different. So in IT, I'm an extrovert, a bit of an energizer bunny. I've got a very different approach. So I'm very people focused and really focused on leadership and culture. As I said before, I'm not motivated by tech. But even the work in IT is generally reactive because you're delivering something for someone else. So I move over to the sales team and the work's proactive. So you own your own diary and you're the one that drives the pipeline, really. But everyone was like me. And
really? Personality-wise?
Yeah, and I know it sounds odd, but it really threw me because I felt like I had a bit of an identity crisis. But on top of that, I needed to sell the product and I was comfortable selling the product and the services, but I didn't understand the lingo and I didn't understand the processes. And for example, they use terms like cadence calls and interlock calls and go-to-market strategies. So I'm on Google trying to work out what a go-to-market strategy is, and I'm sitting on sales calls having no idea what I'm talking about. And my first role, I was the only person selling IT services, and my sales target was $80 million. So the other thing is I'm sitting there looking at the size of the sales that have been done, but prior to me joining, and no one had been selling them. They were just sort of a bit of a fluke, I suppose, or something that would go along with another service or product that Telstra had sold a customer. And I looked at it and thought, I'm never going to sell $80 million worth of product or services in a year. No chance. And so what I actually focused on was how I could actually get that done. And it sounds easy, but it actually took me 3 weeks of literally walking the dogs and constantly thinking about a different way of getting stuff done. And there was about 1,000 telecommunications account execs, so people that were very, very comfortable with telco products but didn't understand IT services. So I actually flew around all the capital cities and did lunch and learns and taught the telco account execs a little bit about what I was trying to sell. And then I said to them, if you get me the lead with your customers, I'll do the rest. So if you can get the door open for me, get me to the meeting, and then I'll take over. So I'll do the proposal and I'll do everything else. That actually worked really, really well. So at the end of the 6 months, I'd done 37 million in sales and I had a pipeline for 80. But I actually did a business case at the time for my boss and created a new role where I got to work more broadly across Asia Pac. So working more broadly with Telstra's customer CIOs, it was amazing.
I mean, the problem solving there is really interesting because it's fight or flight, probably, when you went into that sales role. At any point did you think, no, I need to go back to what I know with the IT role? Yeah.
Yes. Nearly every day for the first month.
Okay. It's important to recognise that, isn't it?
Completely. So part of why I am where I am is because I've said yes to every opportunity along the way. And I really encourage people to do that, but it is scary. And I felt completely out of my depth. And it's funny, that's actually also what I love. So it's painful and really, really hard, but it's actually where you get the most growth. So I definitely thought about going back to IT for the first month or so. And then there were days after that I thought, wow, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. But ultimately for me, German background, and my partner calls me a stubborn German, and I'm a little bit stubborn. I don't like quitting. I actually got a coach at the time. So I'd had a coach before, and it's really interesting as well that previous to that role, my coaching focus was around leading teams and how you lead larger teams. So I sort of went from 4 to 20 to 40 to 200. So that coach was really helping me understand the way that I would change my leadership style. So then I got a new coach, and he'd actually run a spice business, and I got him to coach me on how to sell and how to do that go-to-market strategy. So I also think say yes to everything, but know that you might need help, and find the right person to help you.
Yeah, because I think that's very interesting and useful advice. If people want to change careers, we can all get into a comfortable space, and maybe as we get into 40s or any age think, actually, there's too many things going on in my life to change. You know, I want to be in this comfortable space where I can actually feel good about what I'm achieving. But you can also get that sense of, I'm ready to move on. So it sounds as though you spent some time thinking in terms of this time walking the dogs, which sounds like probably, I can really imagine that being a moment where your mind is open to new ideas. So maybe some time thinking, the resilience that you talked about, look, I'm just not going to quit. So I'll enjoy this afterwards, find someone to help. And I guess that's behind the scenes, is it? You're kind of doing that outside of work, are you?
Completely. Yeah. And I funded that. This is the other thing. I think we're accountable for our careers. And sometimes that means investing in your career. And then if you think where that took me, I then got a tap on the shoulder from PwC. Now, at the time, I was literally like, wow, PwC want me to go and work with them? I was blown away, absolutely blown away. So I definitely think there's nothing that I would do different, even though I've had some really challenging times throughout my career. It's definitely, you just learn so much. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's great. And I can imagine this extrovert character, because it is the stereotype, isn't it? That the IT, I mean, I only started watching the IT Crowd a few weeks ago. And really laughed about, what goes on in the basement, old school of the IT floor. So you talked about having this energetic, extroverted personality. And I'd already heard about this personality from our mutual connection, who said she's so positive, she's got time for everybody, she really listens. And I think that was one thing that actually he pointed out. She talks to these senior people, but she wants to hear from you. So that was lovely to hear. But how did that, when you went into the sales role, what was that experience taking that personality in with lots of other extroverted personalities? What you talked about an identity crisis. I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about that.
I think it's that I really understood my value when I was working in IT, and then I moved over and didn't. And I actually felt less capable or less capable of doing my role compared to everyone else, because most of those people that I was working with had always done sales. The other thing is being salespeople, they were never in the office. So there wasn't anyone to help me. I could never, even if I found a friendly, there wasn't anyone there that I could say, could you please help me? Can you explain this to me? And sitting on sales calls with 200, 300, 400 people from all over Australia, getting asked questions about sales things that I didn't know what they were talking about. I just, I felt very vulnerable.
And then that comes back to what you did to get yourself to understand.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. You know, ultimately we have to at times swat up and not give up. You know, it's not going to be easy in the first place, but at school we all had to get our heads down and learn things that we never thought we'd understand. Why would that be different at certain points in your career, I suppose?
Exactly.
And leadership style. I mean, fire, to me, when I talk about fire and forte, it's about those moments when we know what lights us up. And your leadership style is potentially relatively unique in IT. How would you describe your leadership style as being you on fire? And how did you find that authentic style?
I'll answer your question, but it's I struggle to describe my leadership style because I actually just do what I think comes naturally to me. And I have thought about how my leadership style has changed as my roles have changed and the size of the teams have changed. But I just wanted to share an experience. One of my peers back when I was working at UniSuper, very, very strong, highly regarded leader at UniSuper and more broadly across the industry. And he said that him as a leader he steers the ship. So he's the boss. Yeah. He makes the big calls. He takes responsibility for them, all those sorts of things, which is great. But I'm a really, really different leader to him. And while I will manage across and up, if you like, if you think structurally, so build relationships with my peers. Obviously, at the time I was reporting to the CEO and reporting to the board, and it was really important that I made relationships with all of those people. Ultimately, the quality of my day, if you like, and what we're able to deliver as a team was actually dependent on the team, not on me. And so I think it's really, I think my superpower is finding potential in others, so what's special in them, and really helping nurture that. I also do things really differently to other people. Some people joke that I'm the queen of delegation, and I actually am. There's a really good book, if anyone wants to read it. It's called The 2-Minute Manager Meets the Monkey. And the monkey is the action item, and you've got to be really clear whose back the monkey's on. But anyway, but what I do is, particularly when I start in a new role, I know how different my leadership style is to most other people. I spend a lot of time with my leadership team in particular. But as our mutual friend also has mentioned to you, I walk the floor, I talk to people. I love being around people. It's my number one priority. I absolutely love it. But I would, if I was going to ask someone on my leadership team to take on a piece of work, so whether it's a project or a report or something else, I'd actually spend a lot of time with them sharing what the context is. How does this relate to the company strategy? Why does this matter? What conversations might have happened at the board table or at the executive table, so that they would actually have the context about why they were doing it and the amount of background that they needed. And why I do that is it actually means that they have a deep understanding of what they're doing, and they can then go and lead their teams in the same way. Mm-hmm. And so that gets really different outcomes. And the other thing is, I think as a leader is often we think it's our job to make the decisions, but it's actually get better outcomes if you let your leadership team and others make the decisions, acknowledging that that can also take more time. But I think the way that I am as a leader is probably thanks to my mum. So my mum raised my sister and I telling us that no one was better than us. And I think for me, I've always always had managers, but I've always respected them, but I've never thought that they were better than me. I've always just thought that they have taken a different career path to me, and good on them. They're leading teams now, always hoping that one day that would be me. And so I think it's, I don't care where someone sits in an org structure. Doesn't mean you're more important than anyone else. Ultimately, I think, the thing I find most satisfying is actually working with others and seeing others be really successful. And I think what played out at UniSuper just worked really, really well. We were very, very close and had a really great relationship where there was mutual respect and a lot of trust. That really helped us get stuff done.
Yeah, great. And I imagine that is contagious in a really great way, that you go in with that attitude of trust, respect, and then you start to see it mirrored back, I suppose.
Yeah. This is something else I've learned along the way is it's really interesting. I know it sounds obvious, or probably sounds obvious now, but At the time, I learned that I trust up front. And if someone breaks that trust, they don't get it back. And what I didn't realise at the time is people trust in different ways. But yeah, I do go in with my eyes wide open, but with full trust. And I think for me, that's giving people a benefit of the doubt. As I mentioned to you, back from when I learned at Seek, people aren't bad people. We've got all of these processes trying to make sure people don't do something dodgy, but 99% of people don't. It's the 1% of people that are going to try and get around the system. Yeah, so I think working from a place of trust is really important to me.
And also, like you said before, people want to do a good job.
They do.
And want to rise to the challenge. So when you're trusted, I suppose it's, and someone can see the good in you, you think, great, I'm really going to show them what I can do. You feel quite empowered. I've got to say, a brilliant message that your mum brought you up thinking, because friends and I often talk about imposter syndrome, and it started to feel in my mind a bit like a swear word, because I'm so annoyed with myself for feeling imposter syndrome. I guess that kind of approach of no one is better than you, don't be intimidated by people, must have helped you in each of these job transitions.
Completely.
And I'm wondering if that was helpful when you joined a board as well, where I'm guessing there might not be that many females.
Yeah, so I've been fortunate. I've actually had a full gender split on the boards that I've worked on. In fact, one of the boards that I'm on, we've got more females than males. But that takes me back to what does diversity actually mean? And obviously, being a woman, I will always advocate for women. But for me, diversity is about diversity of thought. And so one thing I always talk about and have tried to do in all of the roles that I've had is actually have a team that represents the customer base. And, if you just think about superannuation, trying to engage with so many different people, so many different generations, and all of them having different wants and different needs. If you haven't got a team that represents all of them, you're sort of doing yourself and your customers a disservice. So for me, it's really about diversity of thought. But something else you just said to me then, the other thing I've had to realise over the years, and I probably got comfortable with this about 10 years ago, but prior to that I was very uncomfortable with it, is that not everyone's going to like you. And that's okay. Because before I came about this realisation, I think I spent a lot of time and a lot of energy trying to make every relationship work. And particularly, when someone doesn't like you or doesn't rate you. And so I'd try and turn them around. I don't do that anymore. It's tiring. It's exhausting. And it doesn't work. Yeah.
Yeah. You kind of hate yourself and cringe at yourself, don't you, as you feel yourself change. Very, very true. And also, if you start looking at the positive and all the people that that you are having an impact on, it's actually much more encouraging than the few that kind of don't get it. Quickly go back to an 8-year-old you coding.
Yes.
Because there's a shortage in women in tech. There is a lot of the skills shortage in Australia. There's also potentially people with itchy feet getting later on in their career. What if women now want to get into coding, for example? I mean, what was it that how would you describe coding? Do you need a mathematical brain? Is it a problem solving thing that you need? How would you describe the skills or the interest that brought you into coding?
Yeah, it's interesting. So my dad actually bought a book to teach himself how to code, but he never used it. I did. I would say coding's like learning how to knit. You've just got to stick at it until it becomes comfortable. So at the start, it's really hard. And maybe it's just the way my mind works, but I don't relate it to having a mathematical mind or anything else. For me, it's doing something consistently until it becomes comfortable. And I suppose at 8, it's like when you see those little kids skiing, downhill skiing, and they're so confident. When you're young, I don't think you think about it as much as you do now. I'll be honest, I wouldn't want to learn how to code now. Yeah, in my 40s. I wouldn't want to out, but I also don't know, that's not the most value I can add to a workplace. And I would probably say that, for most of the people listening to the podcast, it's probably pretty similar. But there's 2 people that I think have demonstrated how you can take your skills from back when you were, in your 20s or whatever, and then turning to IT. And there's 2 examples that come to mind. They're both in their 40s. So there's one person who actually studied social services at uni. And then did more, so moved into more of, I suppose, a corporate environment and did a lot of reporting roles and managing risk and governance type roles. But in her 40s, she actually did a bit of a career switch. It was in the same company, but actually went to run the cyber resilience program. So really helping build awareness around the role that every employee takes in keeping an organisation safe. And so she actually went around and spoke to so many different people. She did a few short courses. She went to some conferences, but she actually took it upon herself to learn about cyber. And the other example is a CPA, so a chartered accountant, who ended up running the office of the CIO. So I sort of think managing a budget of over 110 million. So it's the finance, it's managing risk, it's governance, it's closing out audit finding, it's preparing for the regulators to come in. It's amazing. So I think careers in IT, and I actually want to talk about younger women around careers in IT, if that's okay, because that's probably the most passionate about. I think that women in particular bring something different to the table from an IT perspective. We're very, very naturally collaborative. We have a different approach to problem solving, the way that we work. And that's very complementary, I think, to the more traditional workforce that you find in IT. Bearing in mind, I always say I grew up more on the infrastructure cloud side of IT versus software development and testing, which is quite unusual. So I've always worked with men. So for decades, I was the only female in a team. And I have done work for years with a group called Girl World. And Girl World actually helped talk to teenage girls about careers in STEM. And I spoke at a conference in Sydney, and one of the teenage girls asked me a question, how did you deal with being discriminated against in IT? And I asked her, why do you think I was discriminated against in IT? And she said her brother tells her that, her parents tell her that, her teachers tell her that. And I have to be honest, Hannah, I've had the most amazing experience working in every company I've had. And I say being an asshole isn't gender specific. Yeah, I think you always find someone who's hard to work with, but it doesn't mean it's been a man or a woman. And if anything, I've worked with extremely supportive groups of men, particularly when I was in my 20s, where I describe I was on the tools, so very technical roles. If I was stuck with something, that actually helped me. They'd drop whatever they were doing and help me. And so I think there's this real stigma around IT that I struggle with. And my goddaughter, she's 19, I love her to bits. But I spoke to her about a career in IT back when she was sort of 15, 16, and she said, no, it's boring. So then I used Mecca as an example. And I said, Georgia, how do you think Mecca's run? Like, think about Mecca, all their digital marketing, everything that they do, all the data they've got access to so they know how to, sell products to us, which sucks me in every time. People don't realise that that's tech. I think people think tech is sitting at a desk and coding, whereas I think it's so much more than that now. And tech's running, every single business. So I actually think it's a really exciting time to be in IT. I do feel for teachers because I think, how do you keep pace with the curriculum? Because the kids can learn IT quicker than they can keep up with. So I actually think there's something that needs to be done where IT professionals actually need to start participating in education more if we are really committed to careers in IT for teenagers, girls or boys. Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose people that have actually worked in it and can talk accurately about what it's like to be male or female in the industry. Correct. That negative perception that that someone said to you, that was from people that had never worked in IT, I think.
And to try and change that, but you sort of think this is one thing at a time. I talk at Girl World. I've had people job shadow me. So I said, come and see what a day in the life of working in IT is like. Sometimes we do work experience. So every day they'd spend a day with someone different, so a different role type. But I also, my goddaughter, so for a while she wanted to be a lawyer. And when I asked her why, she said because of the TV show Suits, because she thinks working in a law firm is like that. And so I actually think we need a show about IT and how cool a career in IT can be.
Are there some transferable skills that you would say to maybe anyone that's listening that would be, look, these ones are really relevant in tech, don't think it's too late?
I think for any role, IT, but any role, if you can have experience as a project manager. So even if you do a short course, but to have the experience of managing a project, I manage everything I do like a project. And so I think it's that structure. I know it sounds maybe insignificant, but even understanding a critical path. So something's due on a date, I work backwards from that. I think about engaging with everyone and making sure, once again, it's that leadership piece, making sure everyone knows why they're doing something, why it's important, what it's going to deliver for a customer or for the business. And so for me, I would say my advice would be if you can get some project management experience. But for me, outside of the IT piece, I think the biggest challenges we have is problem solving. And it's collective problem solving. So that's back to that diversity of thought. So it's getting multiple people in a room and helping think about how to solve a problem. And a really good example of that is when we all had to go and work from home at the start of the pandemic. If I'm really honest with you, Hannah, I knew what we needed to do. I could have told everyone what to do. But what I actually did was got a group of about 20, 25 people together in a breakout area, and we all got to contribute the things that we needed to do. And I'll be honest, not everything that I thought had to be done. Sorry, there were things on the list that I hadn't thought of. So that helps show that you do a better job because everyone's got their, able to share their ideas. But also it gave them ownership. The people that took all those actions away, it wasn't just on me. And I think these are the things, it's stuff that sounds basic, but they're things that really create buy-in and commitment to getting stuff done. But the other piece that's had the most significant impact on my career as well is actually making decisions. I think a lot of people get nervous about making decisions. And so I have this natural thought process that I'll back myself, but I go through that what's the worst thing that could happen if this doesn't go well? And as long as it's not breaking the law or going to cost a significant amount of money, I make the call. So I think it's the other piece of advice, the project management piece, but then I would say the problem solving. So thinking about how you go about that and then the confidence to make decisions.
Spot on. So many roles. By the time we've done 20 years in our career, we've often project managed. We've had to have confidence and be trusted upon, haven't we? And all jobs have problem solving. So you start breaking it down. Actually, a job in tech, it doesn't involve coding. So lots of opportunities. Now you've made this big change in the last, I won't say 18 months, but it's probably been about 2 years now. You're now, you now run a cybersecurity advisory board. Like you said, you've got the book, you've got your podcast, and you talked about that this has brought lots of things into your life. I would love to know more about that.
Terrific. So I'm just going to do a little, so this is the baby.
Perfect.
This is the book that Claire and I wrote and published in March 2021. And as I mentioned to you before, it really, really changed my life. And what it allowed me to do, Hannah, was really think about what I wanted my life to look like. And that what I want now is very, very different to what I wanted 5 years ago and 10 years ago. And I wanted variety. So I love working with different people in different types of businesses, and I don't like any day being the same. So variety for me even goes as far, I don't want to go into the same office every day. So I want to be somewhere different every day. I want to be sitting here talking to you today in my yoga pants. Yeah. And then tomorrow I'm going to be back in the city in a suit. So it's those sorts of things. So what I did was I, once again, walking the dogs. I thought about it for actually months because this felt like such a big decision. So choosing to leave your corporate career, I think at any time is quite significant. But to leave it in your 40s, which is has been perceived as too young, really had me thinking about what I wanted, how I wanted to spend my time. And I went through the thought process, do I want to work 3 days a week or do I want to work 5 days a week but not do, what I was doing, like 10, 11, 12-hour days. And so I picture my life now like a pie. And the pie for me, if you imagine a Trivial Pursuit little pie with the slices of pie in it, I don't have all those slices like in the Trivial Pursuit game, but the board rolls is one slice of my pie. And there I get to go and work with different organisations in a very different capacity. So that's more from a governance perspective. So overseeing how the business is being run and having accountability for the strategy and culture and risk. And then another piece of my pie is running the business with Claire, where we work with boards across listed and unlisted. And we help build confidence across executive teams and boards around understanding cyber risk. And once again, it's sort of more of a coaching type approach and facilitating workshops and asking very open questions to help people understand the risk to their organisation of a cyber event. And then my other piece of pie is obviously mentoring and coaching. So I spend a lot of time doing that. I feel really passionate about that. And then another piece of my pie is time for me. And I fill that time, whether it's with yoga, walking the dogs, studying, or not working. And I think the biggest thing for me is, and I'm still working on it, is not working all the time. When I have too much time on my hands, I don't know what to do with myself. And I think that that's come after 3 decades of working. And so to change that has been probably the most significant thing. But a coach that I've worked with for a number of years also said to me, you need to sit in the discomfort. And once again, I'm learning a lot about myself by sitting in the discomfort. And so even though that's hard, I'm actually enjoying it.
Well done for cultivating that life and making it work for you. It's obviously, you talk about the discomfort. What's that taught you?
I feel, so I'm reformed, or not, I'm working on it. The first time I got very uncomfortable, we were in lockdown, I said yes to something that I shouldn't have done. And it was an engagement, so a client engagement, and I did it to fill the gap, to make myself feel comfortable again. So I reverted to what I was comfortable with and what I know. And so this time I felt that way again since then, and I sit in the discomfort and go for a walk, go for a massage, lie down and read a book. I mean, I can't tell you how different my life is, because I used to be on the go all the time. Like one day my partner came out of his office and I'm lying on the couch at 2 o'clock in the afternoon reading a book. And he looks at me like, what are you doing? Because that's not like me at all. And I looked at him and I said, I'm lying on the couch reading a book. Like, because it's so different for me. And I think I am a type A, and I was so driven. And it's not that I've lost my ambition, but I'm applying my ambition in a different way now. Obviously, stepping away from corporate, progression used to look like a step up the corporate ladder. So bigger remit, bigger company, bigger this, bigger that. That doesn't motivate me. So I had to really think about what makes me happy. And as I mentioned, this is very, very different to what made me happy 5 or 10 years ago. But I think that's also, for me, how I've changed as I am getting older. I don't want to be on the way I used to be on. So we talked about the Energizer Bunny. I don't want to do that anymore. Not 5 days a week.
But it's getting out of the groove. So I think that's a really, brilliant example, because you've had to take some, you've had the awareness, but then taking the courage to think, well, that won't change unless I do something about it. So then you've taken some action that feels really unnatural. And I think that's important, isn't it? You could say, I've got this brilliant life now, but habits die hard, don't they? Even
they
if
really do.
Being on all the time. Yeah.
I mean, simple things like, unless I've got a client meeting or a board meeting, I don't have any meetings before 10 a.m. I have a lunch break every day, which I don't think I've had a lunch break in decades.
Wow.
And so for me, it sounds so basic, but even that's my version of not being on all the time. Even just having those breaks through the day. And I'm really careful around changing. I call it context switching. So I try and keep Mondays and Fridays as more of my office/admin days. They might be the days that I read board papers or do client proposals. I also do a lot of reading, a lot of listening to podcasts. So I use those days for that. And then Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays are the days that I'm on. So they're the days I try and have my meetings. I might be in town or working remotely and doing something like what you and I are doing now. But I'm finding that's really working for me, and it feels really good. It feels balanced.
That is amazing. And I'm wondering if that means that those 3 days you're even more on it, or feel like the best version. Yeah, because 5 days is quite a long time to maintain a certain level of energy.
Definitely. I definitely feel energized on those 3 days. And the 2 days, the Mondays and the Fridays, I feel spoiled. Still feels a bit cheeky.
Someone's going to tell you off, you get a phone call from the big boss. Yeah. Well, you mentioned, I've got a real feel for your life that involves walking the dogs. You've got, you're clearly really into yoga, reading, and you've been with your partner for 20 odd years. You know, that, and it's very lovely to see you smile as you talk about him. So
Yeah, he's amazing.
can you tell us a bit about your personal life there? Like what's
yeah,
the
for
secret
sure.
of a happy relationship for 20 years?
So I think if I just focus on the impact that he's had on my career, is one of the benefits is that we work together. So, I mean, I was a baby back when we met. I was really young, but he's seen me at work. And so the days that I come home, like the first 3 or 4 weeks of that sales role, and I would say to him, I don't know that I can do this. I don't know that I'm cut out for this. He's always pumping my tires up. He's like, you've got this. So he's always got my back. But because he's also worked with me, I don't know that I would have believed my partner if they hadn't seen me in action, if you like. So he's been amazing at that. But he's also given me the flexibility to do whatever I want. You know, if I give you an example, he sort of said to me, you're the one, you're ambitious, you're good at what you do. You go and do whatever you want to do. Yeah. I'll make sure that I'm at home. I'll feed the dogs at night, or, you know, I've been to MIT twice. And so he's very supportive and gives me a lot of flexibility to let me do the things that I want to do and be the person that I want to be. Even when I left my corporate career, he was like, yep, why not? And so our plan B was, if it didn't work, then I just can't get another job again. So it's important to us that we've got a plan B. We've got 3 golden retrievers, so we don't have children, 3 golden retrievers. But from a relationship perspective, you talked before, you know, about a bit about what makes it work and all that sort of stuff. I'm really very aware that for decades I probably didn't listen to him all the time. And that's one thing I'm not proud of. And so when I was in those jobs, I was fully in those jobs. And we might be in the car together driving to work, and he'd be talking to me and I'd be on my phone or on my iPad. Or we'd be walking the dogs and he'd be talking to me and I was half listening. And that's why I'm honest, I'm not proud of that. And one of the big things that I really wanted to change was I wanted to be more present. And I've been able to achieve that, and not just for him, but also my family. Like, as my parents are getting older, and, you know, I've talked about my goddaughter, I absolutely adore her to bits, and her cousin is my mum. I get so obsessed with what I'm doing that when I was in my job, I prioritise that over everything else. And for me now, that's what needed to change. And so it's really important to me to now have that time with my friends and my family and not be thinking about work all the time.
Yeah, brilliant. That time that you were on your phone in the car all the time, luckily that was in the past. But I mean, when you see couples now, you know, with one of them spending time on the phone, you know, when you see them in restaurants,
yes,
you just want to go over and say, that's so rude.
Yeah, I know.
Is there some kind of open conversation that you guys would have about that, to say that's, you know, how at the time, because you obviously got through those busy periods, when you look back on it, was there an element of patience, or did you actually have good communication outside of the busy work days when you might be on your phone a bit more?
Yeah, always. So sort of a mix of both. And also, I suppose I was probably more aware that I was doing it, and I'd be the one that would say, you know, let's go out for dinner, because we knew if we went out for dinner, we weren't going to be on our phones, unlike other people. But also he called me to account when I got too much. So as I said before, he did give me a lot of space, but there'd be times he was like, enough, like I've had enough, which was good. It was really good.
Yeah. You probably need to be called out yourself, don't you? Yeah, brilliant. What a life, but you made it happen yourself, so it's really well deserved and very inspirational as well. So I suppose I will end by asking you what's next for you, for your business. You know, with everything that is happening with cybersecurity right now, I'm assuming that it's a particularly busy time, and that could threaten your perfect pie. But what's next? What do you hope to happen in 2023?
Yeah, terrific. So I think that the focus on cyber will continue at a board and executive level, which actually really motivates both Claire and I. So we'll keep doing the work that we do. You're right, we're already seeing an increase in demand, if you like, or requests for us to go and work with organisations. For me, that feels like writing the book and the work that we do and having our podcast was the right thing to do. And so for me, we're going to keep doing that. We feel really, really passionate about it. So that's definitely our purpose. and something that we love. So I'm quite confident that we can continue to maintain that balance. I think it's really thinking about how you run your business and the things that you're currently doing that someone else could help you with. And so when you start a new business, you do everything. And so we're really thinking about ways now that we can actually work with other people. So whether we hire some people or partner with some organisations to actually help us be able to scale. And then I'll continue doing my board work. And I'd like to have some capacity, which I've got at the moment, to do some other board work as well. So I think for me, it's just maintaining that balance. I'm really clear now on what compromises I won't make.
Wonderful. Is there any advice, maybe that is it, that you would give to other women in their 40s thinking about making a career change, or overall?
Yeah, so I think for me it's consider a different way of doing things. If you think about the pie, think about how design your life. I think a lot of us, and I don't think it's gender specific, feel like we don't have a choice but to work full time. I think there's different ways of doing things. I definitely think focus on what makes you different to everyone else versus what makes you, rather than trying to be like others. And always have a plan B. And I think that's the bit for me. I've never had to use my plan B, but I've always had one because I think that gives me the confidence to face into something different. That'd be my advice.
Brilliant. What an epic finish. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Hannah.
And we'd love to listen to your podcast, actually. What's the name of the podcast? So
on any of the podcast platforms, you can search for The Secure Board, and the podcast is called In Pursuit of the Secure Board.
In Pursuit of the Secure Board. Excellent. Thank you so much for a great conversation and keeping Australia safe for cybersecurity, because I don't want anyone to get hold of my details. But, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Hannah. Thanks so much.